Thank you, PM, Chairman, members of Cabinet of St. Lucia and delegation, colleagues all, Ambassador Gregoire. Just want to give a brief synopsis. First of all, let me indicate that the Chairman is here at this time because there was a very deliberate decision taken immediately with the impact of Hurricane Maria in Dominica not to come in immediately because we recognize the scale of the devastation and we felt that our best value to Dominica would be to remain in St. Lucia, in my case, pushing the effort to get as much aid in as quickly as possible. And in the Chairman's case, in consultation with other heads of the OECS, to work the international circuit, the UN Assembly, talking to the World Bank and other multilateral agencies to ensure that we were able to grease the flow of aid into the country as soon as possible. With respect to the work of the OECS Commission, there were 5 major areas of intervention. The first was the coordination of Venezuelan cooperation. As you know, we had 2 C-130 Hercules aircraft available to us in the OECS, and these first came in bringing in 40 tons of aid from Venezuela. There was a Cougar helicopter available that was based in St. Lucia. The Chairman agreed to pay for the fuel. The St. Lucia government paid for all of the fuel provided to these aircraft to do runs to Dominica, and in the case of the helicopter, there were daily runs into Dominica and satellite runs from Douglas Charles and Roseau into the affected communities to ensure delivery of supplies. A total of 40 tons of cargo and supplies were dropped, and 265 civilians assisted with evacuation by the Venezuelans during the period that they were at base in St. Lucia. It was also agreed that St. Lucia would be in collaboration with SEDIMA, that St. Lucia would be the logistical base for getting supplies in. Our role in this entire episode was to work closely with SEDIMA, recognizing the extent of the impact and the fact that SEDIMA had several other locations to address, that the OECS role in this would be to rally the non-impacted OECS member states on a basis of a sort of agreement, division of labor and support to provide continuous assistance to Dominica. So prior to Hurricane Maria hitting Dominica, the agreement was that Dominica and St. Lucia would specialize in the provision of water. So the water companies in both countries were asked to increase their production in order to supply Anguilla, BVI, and what was the other country? Anguilla, BVI. But we provided water to them. When Dominica became affected, it meant now that Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines now had to carry that load to ensure that food supplies were coming in. So there was both sea transportation, the use of barges, and sea transport bringing in supplies, as well as the use of the Venezuelan aircraft. At the OECS end, our pharmaceutical procurement service was also involved in the mobilization of medicine from our suppliers. So we had offers from many of our suppliers of medicine to bring it in. And a very specific service was provided in the case of Soufrière, because Ambassador Antoine of Grenada had gone into Soufrière on a Venezuelan drop and discovered that there were 200 elderly people in shelters who needed very specific medication for diabetes, insulin, and hypertension and other conditions. So the pharmaceutical service was able to shape a delivery of specific prescriptions for those persons, and we went back in and delivered them. The OECS was also involved in working on facilitating bilateral assistance on the request of Prime Minister Skerrit from specific OECS member states to Dominica, and I spoke about that in terms of the assistance that Grenada was able to bring, St. Vincent and St. Lucia. The fourth area of intervention was our mission in Brussels. which has been exceedingly useful because they have a direct line to the EU. The EU headquarters is based in Brussels, and they were able to identify there's an agency of the EU that deals specifically with emergency and disaster situations called ECHO, and this is how we were able to get the water purification plant from Belgium, the government of Belgium, processing 80,000 liters per day. We got 50,000 water purification tablets and a quantity of cots, personal survival kits, and so on, some of which are still to come. So there's been a constant flow from Belgium, the UK, and a couple of the other EU countries. Lastly, our fifth area of intervention is just being a broker to help other disaster missions coming into Dominica. So the GIZ, which is a German support agency, was already working in Soufrière on a project, an environmental project, and because of that relationship with Soufrière, they wanted to focus their assistance there, so we were able to facilitate that. The St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association, the chairman had a meeting in the early hours of the impact of Maria on Dominica with the St. Lucian private sector, and urged them to play their part. The SLHTA decided to focus on the Kalinago territory, and several drops were made from that body. In the case of the Dominican diaspora, we had a lot of outreach from them, and right now you have working in mobile clinics and at the hospital a mission called the Dominica Medical Mission, which is headed by a Dominica National Sanita Scotland, who's a qualified nurse, and comprises at least, I think, 4 or 5 Dominican surgeons and highly qualified doctors who brought in totally self-sufficient. They brought in all of their medicines. They actually purchased $2,000 worth of fresh food from farmers in St. Lucia to bring in, so that in addition to the medical service they provide, they could help with hot meals with the patients that they service. In terms of going forward, now that we no longer have the Venezuelan means of transportation, we are beginning to shift our emphasis at the Commission from emergency response to recovery assistance. And you would have heard Mr. Peter Dillon, who's part of the delegation that came in with me yesterday. Already there's work happening with the planting of seeds so that we can supply seeds. We expect to help Dominica with the assistance of FAO and CADI, who's providing a lot of the seeds. By the time we leave today, there should be, I believe, about 16,000 seedlings already, planted in preparation. But working with the Ministry of Agriculture to ensure that within 4 to 6 weeks, Dominicans can start to reap their own crops, highly nutritious crops such as kale, tomatoes, cabbages, sweet potato, etc. We intend, by the way, to take this project also to BVI, to Anguilla, and to Barbuda, so that the road, we tie in that all into the strategic objectives of the OECS, because as you know, our food import bill is now at $750 million. Not even talking export, agricultural export. If we just get more control over our food import bill, this is how many millionaires we can make from, not having to import $750 million. And trade in the OECS is only 1% of our overall trade. So this crisis has provided us with an opportunity to begin to do things differently, more trade among ourselves, and that is why the chairman has brought on his delegation people like Mr. Bryce from Bryce Company, who have given in the humanitarian phase. They've provided building materials to Dominica free of cost, but now here's an opportunity in the recovery phase for us to use OECS businesses, OECS farmers, OECS entrepreneurs, to work together with each other, create partnerships between Dominican businesses and OECS businesses, so we can create a new vitality of economic growth within the OECS as a whole. Lastly, we have started working the Commission on a vulnerability index, because we recognize that when you look at all of what is happening, Vulnerability is the fundamental issue here, and we defining vulnerability from many perspectives, and not just climatic and environmental, but economic vulnerability, health vulnerability, because the threat of pandemics is real. So we're putting together a team of experts, including a professor who is internationally known from the University of Malta, who's a top expert in vulnerability in small states, in order to develop a vulnerability index that we hope will replace the formula of GDP. And this will be a mathematical index. We are going to use the experience of the hurricanes and disasters in the OECS that have happened to date to test the robustness of that mathematical formula to show the impact of vulnerability on GDP, on growth, on sustainability going forward. So this is where we're at, and we stand continually ready to support Dominica in any way that the government and people of Dominica deem necessary. Thank you.